Before we begin our next panel, for everyone in the back, there is a special networking space on the second floor, and it's outside. Otherwise, for this panel, please take your coffee, sit down. We're almost through with the day, and this panel is going to be really exciting. It's about the discussion of impact funding methods in Web3. So we'll be welcoming to the stage Etki from Paribu Ventures, Khan from Sourcify.dev and Ethereum Foundation, Marshall from Octant, as well as William from Impact Market. So let's welcome them to the stage, and please, if you're in the back, keep the noise levels down. Thank you.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. So I know you've been listening to this amazing content since the beginning of the day, but we have much better discussions coming. So please finish your coffees and take a seat. So yeah, good afternoon again. Yeah, such a pleasure to be here. I want to thank the organizers, Merkezsiz and Paribu Hub, for putting out this amazing event. And so yeah, so today we will explore impact funding in Web3 ecosystem, how blockchain-enabled methodologies improve these systems, what the potential bottlenecks or challenges that we have as we progress in the space, and what the opportunities that are yet to be unlocked in the funding impact world. So, without further ado, I want my panelists to introduce themselves. So, if you can just tell us who you are, where you work at, what you do, etc. So, thanks.
Sure,
yeah,
I can go first. Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Will Lee. I am the CEO of Impact Market. And Impact Market's a protocol that's all about taking the power and the tools of Web3 to deliver financial services to the last mile users all around the world. So we started off with the universal basic income. We have a learn-to-earn program that gives users rewards in exchange for taking courses like financial literacy or crypto literacy. And recently, we've launched a microcredit program that gives microloans to last mile communities all around the world in a very decentralized and community-owned approach.
Cool.
Hi, everyone. Wait, is this working?
No.
Khan, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, everyone. My name is Khan. I'm working at the Ethereum Foundation on a project called Sourcify, also from Turkey. Yeah, now I'm based in Berlin. I used to live here. It's really nice to be back to local events organized by locals. Yeah, looking forward to a discussion about impact funding.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle, and I'm head of ecosystem at Octant. We give out grant funding based off of 100 ETH that we've staked, and so a lot of public good stuff. And I've also authored the State of Web3 Grant Program Report, where we did a deep dive on 13 grant programs who have given out grant funding over the last couple of years. It was the first of its kind study into how grant programs operate, the impact of those, how impact is measured and assessed. And I've done a lot of research on the QF and impact side of things.
Yeah, so thank you. Before we deep dive into the conversation, I just want to ask you, and so that we can level the knowledge level with the audience, what do you think impact is? What impact funding means to you, as on a personal level, also how your organization see it, not only in the Web3 context, but just generally speaking. So that will be my first question.
Sure. So, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the Web3 focus. Since Web3 is what the goals of Web3 is permissionless, open source, and open finance, and not only finance, but open everything. The impact funding plays an important role here because basically what we're dealing here is with the public goods, the things that everyone can use and everyone can benefit, but usually they don't have any monetization method or no direct funding mechanism. So I really appreciate as a community we are experimenting with these things like quadratic funding, retroactive fundings, and not only isolated to Web3. I believe these experimentations will in the future affect the larger area, the larger ecosystem, the software ecosystem, as well as maybe like the governments or maybe our daily lives, because we have also problems in free and open source software, the sustainability of the free and open source software, and I believe what the learnings we learn in the Web3 and the mechanisms can be really integrated into those other fields easily, and maybe even in the physical world, maybe in your neighborhood, maybe in your like small community that you are governing, the funding mechanisms and the incentive aligned new methods maybe cause new ways to fund these.
It's a good question you ask. I like that we're starting at impact, because I think a lot of programs actually have had grant programs without actually thinking about what impact is. To me, it's essentially meaningful change, right? Anything that can actually lead to meaningful change, improvements, actually have an impact. And it doesn't matter what industry it is. I think anything that can lead to growth in any form or change, that's just what impact is.
Yeah, for me, it's like, so I see impact funding in a few ways. One is the impact funding to organizations and protocols that are trying to do positive impact in the world, but also extending that flow down all the way to the last mile communities. So there's $4 trillion funding gap for small and medium-sized businesses in emerging markets, right? Which means that there are people out there that have productive uses of capital that are unable to access it. And so now with the power and tools of Web3, you have the ability to bring that capital in a decentralized and efficient way to people who maybe did not have financial access before. And the second point I want to make is it's not just the what that matters, but it's the how, right? And so now we have this ability to do funding in a way that is more community-driven and community-owned, which is very important. It decentralizes the power away from these intermediaries like MFIs that previously had a lot of power, they're kind of like a lack of transparency. It's a black box situation. And so I love this idea of being able to kind of reinvent the way we're thinking about funding in fundamental ways.
Cool. So, I mean, I want to double click on your specific areas of focus. So, Mashal, like you are focused on Web3 grants. Can you maybe, so that we understand like the size of the industry or the size of the market, can you give us some numbers, like how much grants like how much grants are distributed, how many people receive these, and maybe more importantly, like how people are affected, or can we measure that? Like, do you have some numbers there?
Yeah, so we studied 13 programs. So this is not even inclusive of all the grant programs that are in Web3, but based off of our research, over $1.12 billion have been committed from 2018 to 2023. Over $500 million has actually been deployed, and I'd say close to 860 million over the last 2 years, but over $500 million just by 4 programs in specific as well. Over 6,000 projects have been funded, and so those are some of the numbers that we can talk about.
Cool. What about you, Will? I mean, so your organization is also focused on, let's say, microfinance, and we all know that like microfinance has been there for a long time, like since, I don't know, like 1960s,
years. Yeah, 50
1960s,
years.
yeah. So maybe, can you tell us like just the traditional microfinance is, and like how big is the industry there, and maybe like if you want to deep dive onto the Web3 micro lending, that will be interesting.
Sure, of course. So we sit at the intersection of Web3 and real-world assets and real-world use cases. And so going back, like I mentioned, the funding gap for SMEs and emerging markets is $4 trillion. And microfinance as an industry has been around for over 50 years, and it's still only 230 billion. So it's significant, but not quite meeting the whole pie. And if you deep dive even deeper, on-chain private credit is, I would say, 0.5% of that microfinance industry. So we're at a really interesting inflection point right now, because I fundamentally believe that the next Grameen Bank, the next Kiva that's going to reach scale is going to be on the blockchain, because it provides all these benefits in terms of transparency, instant settlement, like the ability to align incentives between lenders and borrowers in really unique ways. And so I think that that's going to be very, very powerful. I want to see a world in which microfinance is an investable asset class that unlocks a lot of capital down to last mile communities.
So Khan, I mean, you're in a different position than Mashal and Will, so I'm not going to ask you about the numbers, but as a developer at the Ethereum Foundation and maybe in your builders network, what is the experience of receiving grants? Like, can you maybe talk about that qualitative part of the journey?
Yeah, sure. In general, in this Web3 space, there are multiple institutions or organizations that give out grants, EF being one of those. I think we are giving yearly like over $80 million grants to different projects, not only technical projects, but also like projects regarding research, social impact, or other kinds of research areas. In terms of my project, Sourcify, maybe I should give a brief intro about that. Sourcify is a source code verification project. It's ultimately a public good, and we want people to be able to use our tools to verify the contracts themselves, like to remove the centralizing forces in the ecosystem, like some of the block explorers that are used by default, and we want instead Sourcify to be used. And so inherently, this doesn't have a funding model. This doesn't have a business model. So this has to be funded by an organization. In this case, it's EF, and the project is an EF project, but we're also receiving other fundings recently from other projects, such as Optimism, retroactive funding goods, or recently we start receiving funding from a project called DRIPS from Radical, which I find really interesting. The gist there is you, as a software project, fund the projects that you are using. For example, DRIPS were using us, so they started funding us, and then we can start funding the projects that we are using. So in a way, this potentially can create a cycle of sustainable funding between all projects.
I mean, I was just going to ask you about that. Like, as someone coming from the investment side, like, it's critical from my perspective that like these models have a sustainable business models, and so how does it happen? Like with that kind of circularity, you achieve sustainability, or are there any other methods that you can?
Still, the scale is still quite small. Like we are not getting enough funding that we can sustain the project at all, but it's at the experimentation stage. Still, the majority of the funding and the expenses are covered by the EF. Yeah, but still it's a nice experiment, I would say, that can, like, if people start getting inspired by this, we can see other projects being completely funded by that. One thing I also want to touch on with the funding and the business model, let's say, differences is when you get an investment or when you start charging your users, the essence of the transaction with your users, let's say, changes. Like, because when you start to charge your users, your incentives start to change. And when you get investment, incentives start to change because your investors will ask for different things from you, and your users will ask different things from you who are paying your bills. So at the end of the day, for our project at least, it's important that it always stays publicly funded so that we can stay true to our values and what we think the true way to develop the project.
Cool. So, Will, impact markets, you guys are focused on microfinance, we talked about, and then UBI. Maybe it will be great, like, if you talk about like what UBI is, and also like going back to the microfinance piece. As we discussed already, like that the system has been there for a long time, and you mentioned that the next Grameen banks will be on blockchain. Can you tell us like what blockchain enables in the microfinance environment?
Well, that's a big question. Yeah. So first off, I could talk about UBI forever. Before Impact Market, I was actually at an...
UBI is Universal Basic Income.
Yeah, sorry, Universal Basic Income. I've also heard it called Unconditional Basic Income. So it's predicated on this premise that, you want me to go the long answer?
Yeah,
sure.
We have time.
So philosophically, like if you look at labor productivity over the last 50 years, the average person is so much more productive than they were before, right? But real wages have not increased. And so where's that wealth going? That's going to the technologists at the top. And so I believe that that wealth has been created based on the back of public goods, like the investment in infrastructure and taxes and like roads and education and security. And so you can make the philosophical argument that a lot of that that wealth should be redistributed in a way. And it's not just like a philosophical point. Like right now we're seeing inequality boost significantly, right? And so I think, and this is only going to increase with AI, right? So I fundamentally believe that UBI is a necessity in many ways. In my past role, I was at an organization called Give Directly. I launched the largest UBI project in the world. It was $30 million, 12-year study, 25,000 households in Kenya. And so I love this topic. Now, taking it to Impact Market is basically trying to become a decentralized UBI project, a decentralized Give Directly. Because like I said before, the how matters, right? Like right now, UBI and other welfare programs are very centralized, and they're administered by NGOs or governments. And so you create this situation where you have this power imbalance, and that's not great. Like now we have an opportunity to design things from scratch, and we should design it in a community-driven way, where the people who are beneficiaries are also the owners of the system, where the monetary system can create UBI in a very beautiful way. And so I love that idea, but UBI, in my mind, is just the start. Like there's a bunch of research that shows that the way that you give money influences how people spend money, right? So when it's an income stream, so like maybe taking a step back, universal basic income. Universal means everyone gets it, so it doesn't distort incentives. Basic means it's enough to meet your basic needs. And income, so it's streaming over time. I think that's a great start. But when it's an income, people tend to spend it more on resiliency, so things like food security. But if you want them to break out of the cycle of poverty, lump sums are more helpful because you give them like a large grant or a loan, they can invest it in a business, et cetera, et cetera. So for us at Impact Market, we've created these amazing communities through UBI and through things like Learn to Earn. And now we're launching microcredit, which gives them the opportunity to leverage that income and invest in businesses on top of that. And so I see this all fitting together in a really beautiful way. And the second part of your question was like, what makes blockchain uniquely enabled? So a few things. One is efficiency. Like now you have the ability to give money in super cheap ways, instant settlements, and I think that's really powerful. Like that lowers the friction significantly. The second is transparency, right? You imagine now, like instead of the old way where you're just sending spreadsheets back and forth from each other, you have everything on chain, have everything transparent in real time in a trustless system. You reduce the amount of fraud and graft that could happen. I think that's a huge unlock to additional capital in this space. And last is community-driven. You can have a situation where people are rewarded for participating in the network, for incentivizing them to kind of like take ownership. And that's very empowering, right? And this whole idea is how do we empower people? And so that's why I'm super excited about this.
Cool. Yeah, Mashal, I think it's going to be a similar question to you too. So you're in the Web3 grants. How are they different from like traditional grants, like in the Web2, let's say, in terms of like, distribution, effectiveness, like measurement, transparency? Like, can you maybe like, I know it's going to be similar to Will, but like, let's just hear out.
No, there's actually a lot of differences. One of the reasons why Eugene's the co-author of this report, and why we decided to even take on this project was because Web3 grants are like a black hole. I just want to ask everyone in the audience, how many of you have ever applied to a grant program? Raise your hand. How many of you have been frustrated by that experience? Right? So there's been so many experiences. I feel like a lot of this industry has been built up in part, a big part thanks to grant programs, but there's not a lot of clarity, transparency. There's not a lot of understanding on how grants are evaluated. And so that was like a big mission of ours, is to understand what actually happens in these programs. How are they run? How are projects assessed? How is impact measured? These are all questions we had going into it. And coming out of it, I'd say we came out with more questions than answers. So this was probably one of the most tedious projects that I've ever taken on. So it was like a 3-month project. But we had like dozens of interviews with so many different people across each program, right? And we had legacy programs, so we had the Ethereum Foundation, we had Solana Foundation, Algorand, then we had sunset programs with Sunset to Venture or to Community, Polygon DAO, Avogrants DAO, Uniswap, Questbook, and then we had QF platforms such as Gitcoin and ClearFund as well. So we tried to cover a lot of different spectrums of grant programs to see what was happening and just to get a clearer picture. And there were a few things that we were able to understand. One is Web3, most, if not all programs, haven't really learned from Web2 grant programs. I think Web2, in Web2 or traditional grant programs, there's been like years and years of learnings and improvements. So they've been able to build frameworks to measure, to evaluate, to assess, and to understand what long-term impact has been. In Web3, our industry is still so young. It's not really been along for that long. So it's not really realistic to expect long-term understanding at this point. But at the same time, one of our biggest learnings was that most programs aren't measuring impact at all. Yeah. What was really disappointing was that most programs don't even know how many projects are still alive in terms of their grantees. And if you don't even know that, like that's just the bare minimum, right? Understanding how many projects still exist to be able to do anything. So that was one of the first shocking learnings. There were a lot of others too, I'd say. A lot of programs started during the bull market when it felt like a competitive advantage. Everyone sort of was like, oh wait, there's a bunch of funding. Every ecosystem seems to have a grant program, why don't we have one too? So it felt like there wasn't a lot of intentionality and understanding and work that went into mission alignment and the program. And that seems to be a big issue. And then the third part was some of the, I guess each program is so different in terms of their mission and what they want. What we started seeing over more recent programs is that they really want to impact and attract more developers and builders. So that seems to be like a big mission. But then there's others like the EF where it's more open-ended in terms of experimentation. And I'd say legacy foundations like the EF have taken on more risk than other programs where ecosystems can be so specific to just their ecosystem and it's really just to attract. But then there's other programs who, and I'd actually give kudos to the EF for being able to take risks and give funding to projects that other ecosystems would not because they don't see that direct benefit. So I guess there's been a lot, and I guess other programs could do a lot more in terms of that. But the biggest difference would be, yeah, like Web2 would be a little bit different in terms of the impact side. I think Web3 is a little bit more specific to technical impact that they want to attract based on.
Yeah, you gave me a great segue for my question to Khan. So you are at the Ethereum Foundation, and obviously blockchain is a game changer in this ecosystem. And not only like through the grants that EF provides, but do you think, like at the protocol level, does Ethereum Foundation play a role, like, or maybe just to rephrase the question, like Marshall and like, well, do you have any requests from the protocol researchers to make changes so that like your lives will be better and like your impact will be even bigger?
I just want to first start with a disclaimer. Anything I'm saying is like my personal opinion. It doesn't represent EF. Because I mean, EF is a sensitive organization, right? EF values neutrality a lot, and there is actually no Ethereum official statement or what Ethereum thinks. Like there's like, because EF is a like not a traditional organization. Different people have different opinions, and it's like a archipelago, like it's like different islands of like projects working together towards the same goal. And starting with this, I'm actually quite like we are now seeing self-organizing funding mechanisms in the ecosystem that I find really exciting. For example, on the protocol level, there is now protocol guild, which consists of protocol researchers, around 150, that is self-curated and funded by organizations such as Uniswap, Lido, or other protocols or projects that fund this treasury, and this treasury starts streaming funds to these individuals that are working on the protocol, because there are multiple things here. First, the EF won't last forever, because we have a treasury that is like, we are burning, and there's no income here. Second, EF also wants to subtract itself, which is like with the subtraction philosophy that is recently put together, mostly by Aya and others. is that we want now the community to organize itself and flourish itself. We want to be more like a gardener than to control everything. So these funding mechanisms are really essential, I find, in this sense. So in Protocol Guild example, for example, both the projects that are funding are benefiting from the reputation that they are doing this, and also this keeps the individuals that are working on the protocol in the space, because, I mean, obviously they can go work somewhere else and maybe make much more money, but we want them to be staying in this long run area, because it takes so much time to learn the protocol, develop the protocol, and become a protocol developer. Yeah. Do you guys have any requests maybe?
Requests in terms of?
In terms of changes in the protocol.
Oh, I have a whole list. I have a whole list.
Name it.
Where do I start? And for the record, if any of you are interested in our findings, we've got an 86-page grant report. It's publicly available. It was funded thanks to a private donor in Gitcoin on grant programs and the issues and challenges. The first request I'd have from every single protocol and grant program would be to please, for God's sake, have standardization in terms of metrics that are measured. Every program has inconsistency in terms of what they're reporting, and that's really hard to even compare impact because every program reports differently, and we've even seen differences in terms of month-to-month reporting, or every 6 months. It seems to be like, you know, mid of the year they're going to report a different set of metrics, and end of the year it's different metrics. And part of that is because they don't want to highlight drops in metrics from what we've been able to understand. But it's been really hard to even, like, as we went back to like some of the oldest blog posts as we were doing our research, and realized just the inconsistency was terrible. So that was one. Two, giving more resources to programs and operational side. Almost every program was overwhelmed, and the reason why they've not been able to track basic things is because it's always one cycle to the next. They don't have enough resources to be able to even give support to the grantees. And in terms of support, it's not just financial. There's so much more programs can do and protocols can do to support grantees. They can help with talent. They can help with awareness and promotional support, as well as attracting talent and helping with financial sustainability and helping them build out their roadmap. So there's so many other ways and layers of support, helping with partnership support. So that seems to be really valuable, and not a lot of programs do that very well right now. And so that would be another one that I'd love to see more protocols and more programs come together and just collaborating more. MetaGov did this really great thing where they've just launched a standard yesterday for more consistency for reporting, and in a version of a common app, if you will. Mm-hmm. So it would be great to see more programs adopt that and report on that. And then finally, I'd say grant farming, for example, right? Right now, one of the reasons why we're unable to measure, and this is an issue for those who don't understand, some projects apply for grants to almost every ecosystem and get grants from them. This is seen as grant farming, and a lot of grant programs don't like it, but for a lot of projects, that's their only way of being able to survive, right? And so I think the way we look at it is different, but it would be really good to be able to have, and to be able to collaborate with each other and to understand what the impact of each of these grants has been, and to be able to also work together in terms of really just growing the industry as a whole, because that's still an issue, and we can't be working in silos.
So, Will, I mean, I'm going to switch to you and ask the challenges that you face or you will face. Like, I mean, you mentioned that, I mean, you work like in villages in Kenya, and you distribute these like micro credits, but eventually there should be an off-ramp, right? Mm-hmm. Is that a problem that you see, or like, and how these recipients of these microcredits, like, how do they open bank accounts? Like, how do they turn into fiat? Like, can you maybe talk about that?
I would love to. If you wouldn't mind, could I add something to
that
of question? Really quick? So I love these points as well. I just wanted to add really briefly, I think the who and the what get funded also matters. And I would love to see more funding go toward hard problems that solve the needs of real people. And I also want more funding to go to more diverse teams, right? Like if you look
Oh my God, yes.
at yes,
Yes. Fun, diverse teams.
fun, diverse teams. Like if you look at crypto adoption, the top 10 countries around the world, 9 out of the 10 are in emerging economies. That's not where the teams that are getting funding are, right? And so there's this huge disconnect. And I think more diversity in funding is going to be huge to onboard the next billion. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank
about
you.
That's a good point.
We need to take this slogan and like.
Turkey is one of those countries, so
Exactly,
yeah, we
yeah.
need more grants for Turkey.
Yes,
yes,
No,
yeah, we
agreed,
do.
Totally. But to your point about infrastructure.
Yeah.
So yes, that's been a challenge, but I think it's important to solve. So prior to Impact Market, I was at Cello, and Cello is taking a very kind of like grassroots approach to on-off ramps. There's this project called Fiat Connect that is basically trying to create a decentralized network of on-off ramp providers that are serving local needs. So the challenge with a lot of these large ramp providers that you may have heard of is, they have activations in like 100 countries around the world, but that is through like one credit card or something, or one like modality. And the situation is finance is very fragmented globally, right? And so mobile money is very popular in Kenya, bank accounts are very popular in Nigeria, PICs are very popular in Brazil. And so you can't have like a one-size-fits-all solution. You need to have a localized approach. And so we operate in places where there are robust on-off ramps. And the nice thing about that is it gives access to people who may not have the ability to get a bank account. Because especially if you don't have formal identification, if you're below a certain income threshold, the banks won't even look at you.
Yeah, sure.
Right, and so that's why things like mobile money have really taken off in a lot of these places, because it doesn't have as many strict requirements. I think blockchain has the ability to like leapfrog, similar to how mobile money has leapfrogged in a lot of different ways. But we need folks who are doing the tough work. And I think honestly, building good on-off ramps is a slog. It's not like a super like VC 100x type return type situation unless you get like really big. But those kind of local providers are very, very important. And they're like a key piece of the infrastructure that needs to be enabled if we want to bring the next billion onto blockchain.
Cool. I mean, as we build these pipelines and like we try to reach real people like on the streets, on the grant space, like, do you want some like regulatory changes that will improve your work, or like how is that legal landscape looking for you?
It depends, and it changes from region to region, right? Like the U.S. is a mess right now with the SEC not understanding and trying to stifle innovation. I'm based out of Dubai. I've seen like the government and essentially just like the regulation side, like they're really trying to work with builders to understand what kind of, I think just the regulatory framework to pass, and just in terms of the kind of frameworks that are coming out with VARA, with RockDAO, there's a bunch of other entities that are being launched right now. So it's been a little bit more friendlier on that side. I don't know, from a grants perspective, I'd say anytime there's regulators coming in, you just know there's going to be way more red tape, and I think that's going to stop more projects from being able to test, experiment, and run different things. Right now, we're still so early in terms of even playing around with innovation like quadratic funding or with new mechanisms, right? Whether it's retro PGF or whatever new mechanisms you want to look at. So I'd say we're still early on. I would be wary of regulators anytime they come in. And partially because they don't quite work with builders as well or understand, right? There's often this fear of the unknown.
I mean, in my experience, like in February we had this earthquake, and almost overnight, thanks to the push of our legal counsel as well, like we maybe changed the legislation overnight, like so that we could accept like crypto donations for NGOs. And I think sometimes you need those type of like externalities or like edge cases to happen so that like the regulators and the governments take like faster actions.
It varies up as well. Again, bring up the UAE. In terms of grants and donations, it's such a different landscape. Whereas crypto and blockchain innovation is heavily accepted, anything related to donations is so heavily monitored, and it's actually really expensive to register an NGO. So even like the costs and who can accept donations, let alone crypto, is still like a later stage point, but even just like traditional donations is such a hassle, and not everyone can do it. So it just varies so much. But when I compare it to Pakistan, the issue is that like the companies that are registered are not They're effective, but people actually trust people. So there's a lot of donations that people will do from one personal account to another person's when they trust them doing actual groundwork. And a lot of times in moments of crisis, like when the floods were happening in Pakistan and so much was destroyed, the more traditional organizations got a lot of funding, but people were looking for groups that were mobilizing. And we see that happen a lot in emerging markets where there's a lot of this informal coordination happening, even in Turkey, I think, right? Where there were so many personal donations going on in crypto and just outside of crypto as well. And that's sort of like the beauty of things in a lot of ways. I don't know if regulation would help make it. I'd say, if anything, make it easier for people to actually support causes they care about.
Yeah.
Actually, can I respond to that?
Yeah.
So I'm not anti-regulation, but I'm pro-smart regulation. Well, I think the issue here is like, guess the analogy I would use is like, we're on a roadway and there are no speed limits. Like so nobody knows how fast you can drive, right? And so I think having a smart speed limit would make a lot of sense, because then you would incentivize the proper actors, because you don't want people going like 200 miles an hour on the roads. But you also don't want people to have a speed limit of like 20 miles an hour on the highway.
That's very fair, yeah.
Right, and so I think coming to a consensus makes a lot of sense. And I think it's incumbent on us in some ways to educate regulators. But I think it's really hard, because if in the absence of that education, you get all these stories about, and these kind of like false stories, false narratives about like, oh.
Amplified by media.
Exactly,
Yeah.
amplified by media, picked up saying like, oh, there were hundreds of millions of dollars being kind of financing this X group here, right? And that's just not great either. And so I think that we have some growing up to do. As an industry, it's on us to educate regulators. But also, I think the regulators need to understand the technology a little bit better, because right now we're in this kind of gray area where no one really knows how to operate or what to do, and that's stifling as well.
Yeah, in terms of that, I'm also really interested in how the kind of the game theory between states would play in the next years. Like, because if you like stop and don't do anything, you might be falling behind. But if you are taking action, then you can already get ahead of the other ones. So I'm really interested to see like how, especially in US and other ones, how the states see the other ones and try to understand how they regulate the sphere. So it will be interesting to see. Yeah.
So to leave the panel with a more positive tone, like I just want to ask each of you like to maybe share like one, like it can be difficult to pick, but like one specific project that you worked on, like, or you are still working on, like that you're really proud, like that you're proud of your organization, you're proud of the impact. So that will be great. So we can have some more like real life stories to your narrative, and maybe like you can finish that with some of the opportunities you see in the sector going forward.
I can start.
Yeah, you can start.
Yeah, coming from the software development side, I will again state, I think, the DRIPS project from Radical. Again, as I said, this I find really a beautiful use case of truly digital funding mechanism, and I really believe such a thing can change the whole open source and free and open source software ecosystem. On the real world use case, we recently have given out some scholarships to students outside Istanbul that wanted to attend DevConnect and the event we organized, ETH Day. We selected like 35 students, gave them around 200 USD each, and we just asked them to like attend the events and write an article. That's like even such a small amount, and seeing the applications there gave me so much hope that I think we need to, like, these are like, feels like the lower hanging fruits. Like such a 200 USD can make a huge change in that person's life, because 35 out of 35, maybe like 5 of them come into space, they will be working at global places, and their complete life will change. So I think these lower hanging fruits in real life are really interesting, let's say.
Michelle?
I think the first one that comes to mind is probably Quadratic Funding Grounds. Gitcoin did this round with UNICEF earlier this year, and they supported 10 different projects in different parts of the world. that were having on-the-ground impact. And this was the first time like a traditional company or NGO like UNICEF was trying out a method like QF. And seeing the community personally put dollars into supporting these communities and supporting that change was really incredible to see. And a lot of them are doing really great work like AIDS research, helping support financially just in like specific countries in Kenya and in Nigeria as well. A lot of impact in LATAM in terms of agriculture as well. And so there were just so many meaningful projects as well. And that was really beautiful to see. I think that was really great to see. And just to see how it's not just folks who want to see open source developments. There's, they want to actually fund projects happening in different parts of the world. And this was one of the first rounds where community donations were more than the matching pool. And so they kind of overrode those individual, like matching pool donations. And that was one of the coolest things to see is how people came together.
What about you, Will?
Yeah, I mean, this one's easy for me. So impact market, going back to what I was saying earlier about solving real problems for real people, hard problems for real people. That's what we've been doing for the last 3 years. My COO, Jessica's here as well, and she's kind of like on the ground liaising with these communities. And my favorite part of this job is hearing the stories from the ground of people who have gone from no financial access to being able to get a loan and to build a business and then circle that prosperity back into their economies. I think that is very, very beautiful. And in terms of what I'm really excited about, so recently Opera, which is the largest mobile browser in Africa, has launched their wallet, MiniPay, on Cello. And we were the first and only DApp included in that launch. And so I think that this is a really cool inflection point for us to amplify our opportunities. And so I can't wait to see what's next.
I want to hear about that.
Yeah.
So I want a big round of applause for this amazing panel. Thank you so much.